Chapter 1. The Wolf at the Door. Warren Wolf stood in his driveway at 3:47 a.m., watching his son Hollis carry the last box of ingredients into the house. The 18-year-old's eyes were bright despite the ungodly hour, his movements quick and purposeful as he prepared for the most important meal of his young culinary career. "You sure about this, Hall?" Warren asked, though he already knew the answer. He'd seen that determination before, in the mirror, 20 years ago, when he'd walked away from a promising career as a food critic to build something of his own. "Dad, I've been prepping for 2 weeks. Chef Vaughn said if I can pull off a Thanksgiving dinner for 15 people, he'll write my recommendation letter for the Culinary Institute personally." Hollis grinned, that same crooked smile that reminded Warren of his own father. "Besides, Grandma Margaret said she wanted to see what I've learned. This is my chance to show everyone." Warren's jaw tightened at the mention of his mother-in-law, Margaret Gregory. In the 5 years since he'd married Patricia, Margaret had made her disapproval clear through 1,000 small cuts. Comments about his failed writing career, his permissive parenting, his ridiculous support of Hollis's culinary dreams instead of pushing him toward law school like Patricia's brother, Monroe Gregory Jr. But Patricia loved her mother, made excuses for her, insisted that Margaret's sharp tongue was just her generation's way. Warren had bitten his tongue, played nice, kept the peace. For Patricia. Always for Patricia. "Your grandmother doesn't know talent when it's basting a turkey in front of her," Warren said, squeezing his son's shoulder. "But I do. And you're going to blow them all away." What Warren didn't tell Hollis was that he'd made a call 3 days ago. His old editor at Culinary Chronicles, Christopher Harden, was in town visiting family. Warren had mentioned casually that his son was cooking Thanksgiving dinner. Christopher, always hunting for the next big story about emerging culinary talent, had asked if he could stop by. Warren had said yes. He'd also invited Rolf Schwartz, the head chef at Meridian, the city's only Michelin-starred restaurant, who owed Warren a favor from a glowing review years back. And Thurman Booker, a talent scout for the Food Network's youth competition shows. Warren wasn't a religious man, but he believed in his son, and he believed that Margaret Gregory was long overdue for a reality check about what real talent looked like. Inside, Hollis had transformed their kitchen into a professional workspace. Mise en place stations lined the counters, vegetables prepped, herbs chopped, stocks simmering. The heritage turkey, brined for 48 hours in a solution Hollis had perfected over months of practice, waited for its moment. "You need anything?" Warren asked. "Just keep everyone out of the kitchen until service," Hollis said, tying on his apron. "And Dad? Thanks for believing in me. I know Grandma thinks this is stupid, that I should be—" "Your grandmother thinks a lot of things," Warren interrupted. "Most of them wrong. You cook your heart out, son. Let the food speak for itself." As Warren headed upstairs, he paused at the family photo wall. There was Patricia, beautiful and kind, caught between loyalty to her mother and love for her husband. There was Hollis at 10, covered in flour, grinning after making his first successful soufflé. And there, in the corner, was Warren at 25, accepting an award for culinary journalism, back when words about food were his weapon of choice. He'd laid down those weapons for peace, but he hadn't forgotten how to use them. Chapter 2. The Gregory Legacy. Patricia Wolf woke at 6 to the smell of roasting aromatics and found her husband sitting in their bedroom reading chair, a cup of coffee in hand, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Hollis?" she asked. "In the zone. He kicked me out an hour ago." Warren smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Your mother and father arrive at noon?" "Yes, and Monroe and his family at 1. Warren, please." "I'll be perfectly pleasant," he said. "When have I ever been otherwise?" Patricia sat up, pulling her robe around her. "You've been different lately, distant. Is this about my mother's comment last month? About Hollis needing real direction?" Warren took a long sip of coffee. "Your mother has opinions about everything. I've learned to live with it." But he hadn't, not really. Last month's comment had been the latest in a pattern that stretched back years. Margaret Gregory, matriarch of the Gregory family, had built her identity on two things: her late husband Monroe Sr.'s successful pharmaceutical company, and her absolute conviction that she knew better than everyone else how life should be lived. When Monroe Sr. died 3 years ago, he'd left everything to Margaret with one condition: that she guide the family toward excellence. Margaret had interpreted this as license to control every aspect of her children's lives and their spouses. Patricia's brother, Monroe Jr., had folded immediately, becoming a pharmaceutical sales rep despite his dreams of teaching. His wife, Lelia Gregory, had quit her nursing career to become a full-time mother at Margaret's insistence. Warren had been the only one to push back, to say no, to let his son chase a dream Margaret deemed beneath the Gregory standards. "She means well," Patricia said, the familiar refrain. "Does she?" Warren set down his coffee. "Patricia, your mother told Hollis that cooking was servant's work at his graduation party. She's called my writing career a hobby for 5 years. She tried to get you to leave me and move back home when I took 6 months to finish my book. That was a difficult time financially. We had savings. We had a plan. What we didn't have was your mother's approval, and that's what really bothered her." Warren stood. "But today isn't about old grievances. Today is about Hollis. He's worked so hard for this. Whatever else happens, I need you to see that. Really see it." Patricia felt the familiar squeeze in her chest, the impossible position of being pulled between two people she loved. "I do see it. I'm proud of him." "Are you?" Warren's voice was gentle but firm. "Or are you proud of who he might become if he gives up cooking and goes to law school like your mother wants?" Before Patricia could answer, a knock interrupted them. Hollis stood in the doorway, his face flushed from the kitchen heat, a proud smile breaking through his nervousness. "First course is done. Want a taste?" Warren crossed the room and tasted the butternut squash soup with sage oil and crispy prosciutto. It was perfect, silky, balanced, sophisticated, exactly what Warren had expected. "Hollis, this is restaurant quality," Patricia breathed after her own taste. "It's better than restaurant quality," Warren said. "It's exceptional." What neither of them knew was that downstairs, Margaret Gregory had let herself in with her copy of The Key 3 hours early, and was currently standing in the kitchen, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval as she surveyed the culinary chaos of a working kitchen. Chapter 3. The words that changed everything. Margaret Gregory had built an empire on the appearance of perfection. Her home was a showplace, her charity events were legendary, and her family, or at least the image of them, was impeccable. She'd tolerated Warren Wolfe because Patricia loved him, but that tolerance had limits, and those limits included her grandson wasting his life in a kitchen. She pulled out her phone and called her daughter-in-law. "Lelia, dear, I need you to do something for me." At noon, the Gregory family began arriving. Monroe Jr. came first with Lelia and their 2 children, followed by Margaret's sister Janet Hubbard and her husband Kent Hubbard, and finally Margaret's best friend Dolly Reyes with her son Christopher Reyes. Warren greeted them all with practiced courtesy, noting how Margaret immediately began positioning people in the dining room, her room, as she'd started calling it since she'd bullied Patricia into redecorating it to match Margaret's aesthetic. "Where's the boy?" Margaret asked, her voice carrying that particular tone that made boy sound like help. "Hollis is finishing preparations," Warren said. "He's been cooking since 4 a.m. "How industrious," Margaret said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. "Patricia, dear, come help me in the kitchen." Warren watched them go, that old instinct prickling. He'd spent years reading people for his reviews, learning to spot the tells that meant a restaurant was hiding something. Margaret had tells too, and right now they were all firing. He followed quietly. In the kitchen, Hollis was plating the appetizers with focused intensity. Margaret stood watching him with Patricia at her side, her expression hovering between disgust and pity. "Patricia," Margaret said, her voice low but not low enough, "you can't possibly think this is appropriate. Look at this mess. Look at him. Covered in grease and sweat like a chef, Warren said from the doorway. Margaret's spine stiffened. Warren, we were just discussing. I heard what you were discussing, Warren said evenly. Hollis, how's the timing? 15 minutes to service, Dad. Hollis's voice was tight. He'd heard too. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Patricia, I think we need to talk. Privately. Warren watched his wife follow her mother into the living room, watched through the doorway as Margaret leaned close and whispered something that made Patricia's face go pale. Then Margaret pulled out her phone, tapped it, and showed Patricia the screen. Warren couldn't hear the words, but he saw his wife's shoulders slump, saw her nod, saw her pull out her own phone. What's going on? Hollis asked, his hands pausing mid-plate. I don't know yet. Keep working. 10 minutes later, Patricia returned to the kitchen with Margaret close behind. Warren, Patricia said, her voice strained. Mom thinks maybe we should... There's a lot of people, and Hollis is still learning, so maybe we should just order some pizzas to supplement. Supplement? Warren repeated slowly. Just to be safe, Margaret said, her voice dripping false concern. We wouldn't want anyone to go hungry if the food isn't sufficient. Warren looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw something break inside her. She was going to do it. She was going to let her mother order pizza while their son served a meal he'd spent weeks planning. Patricia, he said quietly, look at this food. On the counter sat course after course of culinary artistry. Butternut squash soup with handcrafted garnishes, a turkey that would make professional chefs weep, sides that belonged in a magazine spread, desserts that required techniques most home cooks never attempted. It's very nice, but... Patricia started. Order the pizza, Margaret interrupted. In fact, Lilia's already called it in. It'll be here in 30 minutes. And that's when Warren heard it. Margaret had turned slightly toward the living room where Lilia stood with her phone, and in that turn, she'd angled closer to Patricia. Close enough to whisper, but not close enough to realize that the kitchen had excellent acoustics, and Warren had spent years training his ear to pick up critics' whispered comments in restaurants. Order pizza, Margaret murmured to Patricia. We're not eating his food. Dog food is better than his cooking. The words hung in the air like poison. Warren looked at Hollis, saw his son's face crumble as he registered what his grandmother had said. Saw 18 years of encouragement and hard work and dreams crack under the weight of those casual, cruel words. Something inside Warren Wolf, something that had bent and flexed and compromised for 5 years, finally snapped clean. He walked very calmly to the bedroom, pulled out 2 duffel bags, and began packing. Clothes for him, clothes for Hollis, essentials, his laptop, the folder with his important documents. Warren? Patricia appeared in the doorway. What are you doing? Leaving. What? Why? Warren, it's just pizza, don't be... He turned to face her, and whatever she saw in his expression stopped her mid-sentence. Your mother just said that dog food is better than our son's cooking, Warren said, his voice perfectly calm and perfectly cold. She said it where he could hear. Where I could hear. And you were going to let her order that pizza. You were going to let our 18-year-old son serve a meal he slaved over while pizza sat on the table as a backup, as insurance against his failure. Warren, she didn't mean, she meant every word, and you chose her. Again. He zipped the bags, walked past his wife, and found Hollis in the kitchen, staring at his food with tears streaming down his face. Hall, Warren said gently, pack up anything you want to keep. We're leaving. Dad, I can't. The food. Leave it. All of it. Let them eat pizza. Warren pulled his son into a fierce hug. You are brilliant. You are talented. You deserve better than this. We both do. 20 minutes later, Warren and Hollis walked out of the house carrying their bags. They didn't say goodbye, didn't make a scene, just left, quietly and completely. Behind them, Margaret Gregory stood in the doorway of a dining room set for 15 people, surrounded by some of the most beautiful food she'd never bothered to taste. And for the first time in her life, she had no idea what to say. But Warren Wolf knew exactly what he was going to do next, and Margaret Gregory was going to learn what happened when you pushed a wolf too far. Chapter 4. The First Domino. Warren drove them to the Riverside Inn, a boutique hotel downtown where he'd once stayed during a review assignment. The manager, Nanny Wyatt, greeted him like an old friend. "Warren Wolf, as I live and breathe. Haven't seen you since you gave us that beautiful write-up 3 years ago." She saw Hollis's tear-stained face and Warren's tight expression and didn't ask questions. "You need a room?" "2 if you have them. And Nanny, is your restaurant kitchen available this week?" She raised an eyebrow. "For you? Always. What are you planning?" "Something overdue." In their adjoining rooms, Warren let Hollis decompress while he made calls. The first was to Christopher Harden. "Warren, I'm about 20 minutes from your place. Should I bring wine or—" "Change of plans. I'm texting you a new address. Riverside Inn. Can you still make it?" "Everything okay?" "Not yet, but it will be." The second call was to Rolf Schwartz. "Rolf, it's Warren Wolf. That favor you owe me, I'm calling it in." By 3 p.m., Hollis had set up in the Riverside Inn's restaurant kitchen, closed on Thanksgiving but available to guests, and was replating the food they'd managed to salvage. Not the turkey, which had been abandoned to Margaret's dining room, but the sides, the soups, the desserts, enough to showcase his talent. At 3:30, Christopher Harden arrived, followed by Rolf Schwartz and Thurman Booker. "Gentlemen," Warren said, "thank you for coming. I promised you a meal cooked by an emerging talent. That hasn't changed. What has changed is the venue." He didn't explain further. He let Hollis's food explain. Christopher tasted the butternut squash soup first, then the sourdough rolls with herb butter, then the duck confit that Hollis had prepared as an alternative to turkey. His eyes widened with each course. "Warren," Christopher said slowly, "who trained this kid?" "He's been working with Vaughn Golden at the Culinary Arts Academy for 2 years, self-taught before that." Rolf Schwartz set down his fork after tasting the dessert, a deconstructed apple tart with cinnamon gelato. "This is Michelin star-level technique. How old is he?" 18. Thurman Booker was already on his phone. "I'm calling the producers. Warren, you said this is your son?" "He is." "And he cooked all this today?" "Starting at 4 a.m. Christopher leaned back in his chair, studying Warren. "There's a story here. Want to tell me what really happened?" Warren glanced at Hollis, who nodded. "My son cooked a Thanksgiving dinner for 15 people, Warren said. "My mother-in-law said dog food was better than his cooking. I heard her. He heard her. So we left." The table went silent. Then Christopher smiled. Not a nice smile, but the smile of a journalist who'd just found his story. "Warren, how would you feel about me writing this up? Talented teen chef, rejected by family, discovered by industry professionals, human interest, underdog story, the works. Only if Hollis is comfortable with it." Hollis looked at the 3 men at the table, men who understood food, who could see what he'd created. "Will it help other kids like me, who have families that don't believe in them?" "Kid," Thurman said, "it'll do more than that. It'll make you famous." While they ate and talked and made plans, Warren's phone buzzed continuously. Patricia, Margaret, Monroe. He ignored them all. At 6 p.m., Christopher published his article online with photos of Hollis's food. By 7, it had been shared 5,000 times. By 8, it was trending on social media. And at Margaret Gregory's house, the Thanksgiving dinner she'd salvaged with pizza was interrupted by Monroe's phone ringing. "Mom," he said, his face pale, "you need to see this." Chapter 5. The Gregory Scramble. Margaret Gregory prided herself on controlling narratives. She'd done it for years, spinning Monroe Sr.'s pharmaceutical price hikes as necessary innovation, positioning her charity work as selfless when it was really about social climbing, presenting her family as perfect when it was held together with fear and obligation. But she'd never dealt with the internet. Christopher Harden's article was devastating. Not because it attacked her directly, Christopher was too skilled for that, but because it told a simple, powerful story, A talented teenager cooking his heart out only to be rejected by his own family. The photos of Hollis's food contrasted sharply with the quotes from industry professionals praising his technique. And buried in the middle, one paragraph. When asked why he left his family's Thanksgiving dinner, Hollis Wolf simply said, "My grandmother told my mom that dog food was better than my cooking. My dad heard it. He packed our bags and we left. He told me I deserved better. I guess I finally believe him." By 9 p.m., the Gregory family name was being discussed in food forums, on cooking shows, in comment sections across the internet, and the consensus was unanimous. Margaret Gregory was a monster. "You have to fix this," Monroe Jr. said, pacing Margaret's living room. "Mom, the company, people are already connecting the dots. They're talking about Gregory Pharmaceuticals, about our family values, about—" "It's one article," Margaret snapped, but her hands were shaking. "It's trending on 3 platforms," Lelia said quietly, "and someone found your charity event photos and started commenting on them. They're calling you a hypocrite for running a family values foundation while treating your own grandson like—" "Enough," Margaret said. "I'll handle this. Patricia, call your husband." Patricia sat in the corner looking smaller than Margaret had ever seen her. "He won't answer." "Then go to him. Tell him we'll apologize. Tell him what, Mother?" Patricia's voice cracked. "That you didn't mean it? We both know you did. You've been criticizing Hollis for years, and Warren and me for not controlling them better. You got exactly what you wanted. Warren gone, Hollis humiliated. This is your victory. Enjoy it." Margaret slapped her daughter across the face. The room went silent. Monroe stood frozen. Lelia gasped, and Patricia touched her cheek, something hardening in her eyes. "That's the last time you'll ever do that," Patricia said quietly. "Warren was right. He's been right about everything." She stood and walked out, leaving Margaret standing in her perfect dining room, surrounded by the ruins of her perfect Thanksgiving, realizing too late that she'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. Chapter 6. The Wolf's Plan. Warren sat in his hotel room reading the comments on Christopher's article. They were brutal toward Margaret, far more brutal than he'd expected. Good. But that wasn't enough. Public shaming was satisfying, but it wasn't justice. It wasn't revenge that fit the crime. He opened his laptop and began researching. Margaret Gregory, Gregory Pharmaceuticals, Margaret's Charity Foundation, the family values speeches she'd given at fundraisers, and there, buried in old local news articles, he found it, Margaret's origin story. She'd been Margaret Carlyle before marrying Monroe Sr., daughter of a coal miner, working 2 jobs to put herself through community college. She'd met Monroe at a pharmaceutical sales event where she was serving drinks. She'd been nobody, nothing, until she'd caught his eye and married her way into wealth. Warren kept digging. Old classmates from Margaret's community college days, former co-workers, people who remembered the girl she'd been before she became Margaret Gregory, matriarch and snob. And one of them, a woman named Lucia Lynn who'd worked with Margaret at a diner, had a story to tell. "Oh, I remember Margaret," Lucia said when Warren called her. "Worked the kitchen with me for 3 years. She wanted to be a chef, actually. Talked about it constantly. But when she met Monroe, she dropped it all. Said cooking was beneath her now. Broke her mother's heart. Her mama had been saving up to send her to culinary school." Warren's smile was sharp as a knife. "Lucia, would you be willing to go on record with that?" "About Margaret? Honey, I'd pay you for the chance." The second piece came from Monroe Jr.'s company records, which Warren accessed through a contact he'd made years ago during an investigative piece on pharmaceutical pricing. Monroe Jr. was failing. His sales numbers were terrible, his performance reviews were damning, and he was being kept on only because of the Gregory family name and Margaret's influence with the board. The third piece was pure luck. Dolly Reyes, Margaret's best friend, had a son, Christopher Reyes, who worked in event planning. And Christopher Reyes had just been hired to organize the annual Gregory Foundation Gala, scheduled for December 15th. Warren made another call. "Christopher, it's Warren Wolf. We need to talk about your mother's best friend and the biggest event of the year." By midnight, Warren had the framework of his plan. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't violent. But it would be devastating. He was going to give Margaret Gregory exactly what she'd given Hollis: public humiliation in front of everyone she wanted to impress, at an event she'd spent months planning, with the truth as his weapon. And she'd never see it coming. Chapter 7. The Setup. The Gregory Foundation Gala was Margaret's crowning achievement every year. 500 guests, $10,000 per plate, coverage in society magazines. It was where the Gregory family displayed their perfection. This year, it was going to be different. Warren spent 2 weeks preparing. He contacted Lucia Lynn and 4 other people who'd known Margaret before her reinvention. He compiled records of her charity foundation's actual work versus its claimed impact. He gathered evidence of Monroe Jr.'s failing career and Margaret's interference in keeping him employed despite his incompetence. And he made arrangements with the gala's event planner, Christopher Reyes, who turned out to have his own grievances with Margaret after she'd berated his mother, Dolly, for gaining weight. "What do you need?" Christopher asked. 20 minutes of the program, Warren said, a video presentation, and a special menu for the dinner service. "You're cooking?" "Not me. My son." The beauty of Warren's plan was its simplicity. Margaret would get exactly what she'd always wanted: attention, prestige, a perfect event. And then it would all collapse, piece by piece, because of her own actions. Meanwhile, Hollis was becoming a sensation. Thurman Booker had gotten him a spot on a Food Network special about young culinary talent. Rolf Schwartz had offered him an apprenticeship at Meridian. And Christopher Harden's follow-up articles, which included interviews with Hollis's mentors, his culinary school instructors, even customers from a pop-up dinner he'd done, painted a picture of a young man whose talent had been suppressed by family cruelty. Patricia had moved to a hotel separate from Warren and Hollis, caught in limbo between her old life and an unknown future. She'd called Warren twice, both times to apologize, both times unable to fully commit to leaving her mother's influence. "I don't know how to be without her," Patricia confessed during their second call. "She's controlled everything for so long." "Then learn," Warren said, not unkindly. "Patricia, I love you. I always will. But I won't sacrifice our son's happiness for your mother's approval anymore. The choice is yours." She'd cried and hung up. Margaret, meanwhile, was scrambling to repair her image. She'd tried to reach out to Hollis through social media, through Monroe, even through Patricia, with offers of reconciliation that were really just PR opportunities. Hollis blocked her on everything. She'd hired a crisis management firm that advised her to lean into the charity angle and demonstrate personal growth. So she'd announced a new scholarship at the gala, the Gregory Culinary Excellence Award, for young chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Warren laughed when he read about it. She still didn't understand what she'd done wrong. She thought this was about optics, about damage control. She was about to learn otherwise. December 15th arrived. The grand ballroom at the Rivermont Hotel was transformed into a winter wonderland. 500 guests in evening wear mingled over cocktails. Margaret held court in a designer gown playing the gracious philanthropist. And in the kitchen, Hollis Wolfe supervised the dinner service with a team of professionals Warren had hired, including Vaughn Golden and 2 sous chefs from Meridian. "You ready for this?" Warren asked his son. Hollis looked at the menu they'd designed, a menu that would tell its own story. "Dad, are you sure about this? It's pretty brutal. She called your food dog food. She tried to destroy your dream. She spent 5 years undermining everything I've built with your mother." Warren's expression was calm, but his eyes were hard. "This isn't brutal. This is proportional." At 8 p.m., dinner service began. Chapter 8. The Feast. The menu at the Gregory Foundation Gala was designed by Warren and executed by Hollis. Each course told a story, Margaret's story, whether she recognized it or not. First course: Coal Miner's Daughter. A humble dish of cornbread with bacon fat and collard greens, the food of Margaret's childhood, elevated to fine dining standards. The program described it as a tribute to traditional American working-class cuisine. Margaret's face went white when she saw it. The table murmured about the unexpected choice. Second course, the aspiration. A deconstructed version of diner food, meatloaf reimagined with Wagyu beef, mashed potatoes transformed into a delicate puree, green beans turned into a French-style haricots verts. The program noted, inspired by the American dream of transformation through hard work and dedication. Margaret's hand shook as she lifted her fork. Third course, the sacrifice. A dish that was notably absent. The menu listed classic French cuisine in the style of Julia Child, but the plates arrived empty except for a card that read, "Some dreams are abandoned for others. This course represents the paths not taken." Whispers spread through the ballroom. What was happening? Fourth course, the empire. An ostentatious display of luxury, caviar, gold leaf, truffle oil, all the expensive ingredients that signified wealth, but weren't actually particularly well composed. It was technically perfect, but soulless. The program called it the cost of maintaining appearances. Margaret stood up. What is the meaning of? The lights dimmed. Fifth course, the truth. The screens around the ballroom flickered to life, and Warren Wolf's voice filled the room. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to the Gregory Foundation Gala. Tonight's dinner has been a journey through one woman's life, from coal miner's daughter to society matriarch. But there's a course that's been missing from this story. The truth. The screens showed photos, young Margaret in a diner uniform, articles about her culinary school dreams, quotes from Lucia Lynn about how Margaret had abandoned cooking when she married Monroe Sr. Margaret Gregory built her empire by rejecting who she was and where she came from. She married wealth, adopted pretension, and spent decades enforcing rigid standards on everyone around her, especially her family. More images. Patricia looking miserable at family events. Monroe Jr.'s failing performance reviews. And finally, photos of Hollis's Thanksgiving dinner. The beautiful food left abandoned. 3 weeks ago, Margaret's 18-year-old grandson cooked a Thanksgiving dinner worthy of a professional kitchen. He'd been working toward this moment for years, and Margaret told her daughter to order pizza instead, saying that dog food was better than his cooking. Gasps around the room. Margaret's face was bright red. The young man who cooked tonight's dinner, the exceptional meal you've been enjoying, is that same grandson, Hollis Wolf, a chef with more talent and integrity than his grandmother ever allowed herself to pursue. The final screen showed Hollis in the kitchen, working alongside Vaughn Golden and the Meridian team, creating art from ingredients. Margaret Gregory's charity foundation claims to support family values and nurturing young talent, but she couldn't support her own grandson's dream. She couldn't see past her own prejudices to recognize his gift. Tonight's scholarship announcement? It's PR, damage control, an attempt to buy back a reputation she destroyed through her own cruelty. Warren appeared on screen now in a pre-recorded video. I'm Warren Wolf. I was married to Margaret's daughter, Patricia. I say was because I filed for divorce, not because I stopped loving her, but because she chose her mother's approval over our son's well-being, over our family. Patricia, sitting at the Gregory family table, burst into tears. Everything you've eaten tonight was prepared by the young man Margaret rejected. Every course was excellent, professional, worthy of the best restaurants in this city, and Margaret would have let it rot on a table while she served her guests pizza, all to prove that her grandson wasn't good enough. The screens went dark. The lights came up, and 500 pairs of eyes turned to stare at Margaret Gregory, who stood frozen in her designer gown, publicly exposed as the hypocrite she'd always been. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. The fallout was immediate and devastating. The Gregory Foundation board called an emergency meeting within hours. By morning, Margaret had been removed as chairwoman. The local news picked up the story, amplifying what had already gone viral online. Gregory Pharmaceuticals stock dropped 3 points as investors worried about the family's reputation affecting the brand. Monroe Jr. was quietly let go from his position, his protection revoked. Lelia filed for separation a week later, tired of living under Margaret's control. Patricia signed the divorce papers without contesting anything. She sold the house, split everything down the middle, and moved to an apartment across town. In their last conversation, she told Warren, "I don't know who I am without her, but I need to find out." "I hope you do," Warren said gently. "And when you figure it out, if you want to rebuild, not for her, but for you, call me. We'll see where we are." But the real story was Hollis. The gala dinner became legendary in food circles. Christopher Harden wrote a 3-part series about it. Rolf Schwartz confirmed Hollis's apprenticeship at Meridian, starting in January. The Food Network offered him a spot on their new competition show for young chefs, and Vaughn Golden, Hollis's mentor, pulled Warren aside at a celebration dinner and said, "You know what you did was insane, right?" "Completely," Warren agreed. "Good. That kid needed someone to fight for him that hard. Hell, every kid needs that." 6 months later, Warren stood in a small restaurant called Wolf's Den, his new venture, a casual bistro where he did food writing and Hollis did weekend pop-up dinners between his apprenticeship shifts. Margaret Gregory had sent a letter. Warren held it, unopened, debating. "You gonna read it?" Hollis asked, prepping vegetables for the evening service. "Should I?" "Your call, Dad." Warren opened it. The letter was short. "Warren, I have spent 6 months in therapy learning to understand what I did wrong. It is harder than I expected, dismantling a lifetime of belief that my way was the only way. I cannot undo the damage I caused. I cannot take back what I said about Hollis's cooking. Cooking that I now understand was exceptional, and that I was too proud and too afraid to acknowledge. I rejected in him what I had rejected in myself, the dream of creating something beautiful with my hands. I punished him for having the courage I lacked. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. But I wanted you to know that you were right, about everything, and that your son is lucky to have a father who fought for his dreams when his family wouldn't. I hope someday I can earn the right to tell him that myself. Margaret." Warren set down the letter. Outside, the evening crowd was gathering. Food writers, critics, young chefs, people who appreciated what Hollis could do. "What did it say?" Hollis asked. "That she's sorry, that she understands what she did wrong. You believe her?" Warren watched his son work. Confident now, his movements sure, his future bright. "I believe she's trying. Whether that's enough," he shrugged. "That's not my decision to make." "It's not mine either," Hollis said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "Fair enough." They worked in comfortable silence, preparing for the evening service. Outside, the sign for Wolf's Den glowed against the dusk. Good food, no bullshit, everyone welcome. Warren had spent years bending for peace, compromising for harmony, accepting disrespect for love. And in the end, all it had taken was one moment of clarity, hearing his son's dreams dismissed as worthless, to remember who he was. He was Warren Wolf, food writer, father, fighter when it mattered, and he taught his son the most important lesson of all. That talent without someone who believes in it is just potential. But talent plus belief? That could change the world, or at least ruin a very fancy dinner party. Either way, it was deeply satisfying.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.